The gavel came down before I could raise my hand, and just like that, 7 billion people became property. I am Ilara Marsh, and I was sitting in the observation gallery of the Galactic Council chamber when the vote passed. 312 delegates. 312 species, from the crystalline Voth to the six-limbed Enrathi, all raising whatever appendage they used for voting, all agreeing on the same thing. Earth's exclusive trade rights, our resources, our labor contracts, everything that made humanity useful to the galaxy, sold to the highest bidder. The Caliph combine. I did not gasp. I did not stand up and shout. I had known this vote was coming for 6 months, ever since the Council reclassified humanity from Tier 3 unaligned species to Tier 3 unaligned asset. The difference between those two words was the difference between being ignored and being owned, and nobody in that chamber seemed to notice they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The Caliph ambassador, a tall being named Threl Dosan, with skin like brushed silver and eyes that never seemed to blink, rose from his seat and gave a small bow to the council. "Thank you," he said, his translator device flattening every syllable into something cold and mechanical. "The Combine looks forward to a long and profitable relationship with the Marsh species." He did not know my name was also Marsh. He was simply reading from a briefing file that used the most common surname among human diplomats as shorthand for the entire species, because nobody on that council had ever bothered to learn that humans had more than one name each, that we had families and histories and languages that stretched back further than most of their empires. To them we were a resource. A useful, cheap, disposable resource that happened to be shaped like them. I stood up anyway. "Human delegates do not have voting rights on this council," said the presiding officer, a Voth elder whose crystalline body caught the chamber lights and scattered them into 1,000 small rainbows across the floor. "But you may address the floor for exactly 90 seconds before the session closes, Delegate Marsh. Use your time wisely." 90 seconds. That was the entire value they placed on 7 billion lives, on every human who had ever built a bridge, or written a symphony, or fought a war to survive another day. 90 seconds, and then the gavel would fall again, and it would be final. I walked down from the gallery, my boots echoing against the polished floor, and I felt every eye in that chamber on me. Some curious, some pitying, most simply bored, already thinking about lunch, already forgetting that a species was about to disappear into a trade contract. I did not raise my voice when I began to speak, because I did not need to. "Before this vote becomes permanent," I said, "I have one question for the Council. Just one, and I promise you, it is worth more than 90 seconds. The Voth Elder's crystal body flickered with something like impatience. "Ask your question, Delegate Marsh. Who built the relay network?" The chamber went very quiet. It was not a dramatic silence. Nobody gasped. Nobody leaned forward in their seats. It was the quiet of 300 delegates, each assuming someone else knew the answer, each waiting for someone else to speak first, because the truth was that nobody in that room actually knew. The relay network was simply there. It had always been there. Every species in the galaxy used it to travel faster than light, to send messages across 1,000 systems in the blink of an eye, to build empires that spanned more space than any single mind could hold. It was the foundation beneath every ship, every colony, every trade route in known space, and in 300 years of galactic civilization, nobody had ever asked the obvious question. Ambassador Dosan broke the silence first, because silver-skinned diplomats do not like silence. They find it suspicious. "The relay network was built by the architects," he said, using the term every schoolchild in the galaxy learned before they could walk. "A precursor civilization, extinct for approximately 300 years. Their identity is unknown. Their extinction is a settled historical fact." I let his words hang in the air for a moment before I answered. "Is it?" I said. "Settled, I mean. Because I have read every archive the Council maintains on the architects, and I noticed something interesting. Nobody has ever found a body. Nobody has ever found a grave, a ruin, a monument, a single physical trace of an extinction event. You have relay stations that have run without failure for 12,000 years, self-repairing, self-updating, adapting to new species and new technologies as they emerge. Extinct civilizations do not update their infrastructure, Ambassador. Dead engineers do not fix broken systems. Threl Dosan's silver skin seemed to lose a shade of its shine. What are you suggesting, Delegate Marsh? I am not suggesting anything, I said. I am telling you a fact, and then I am going to let you decide what to do with it. The architects are not extinct. They never left, and you just voted to purchase their descendants like livestock. The chamber erupted into noise, 300 delegates all talking at once, translators struggling to keep pace with the overlapping voices, and through all of it, I stood perfectly still at the center of the floor, watching the fear spread across faces that had never once considered they might be wrong about something so fundamental. The Voth Elder struck the ceremonial gavel against its resonance plate, and the sound cut through the noise like a blade. Order, the Elder said, its crystal voice sharp. Delegate Marsh, your accusation is extraordinary, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. You have made a statement. You have not proven anything. You are right, I said. I have not proven anything yet, but I will, and when I do, I want every delegate in this chamber to remember exactly how you voted today, and exactly what you were about to do to the species that built the ground you are all standing on. I turned and looked directly at Ambassador Dozan, and for the first time since I had entered that chamber, I allowed myself to smile. You asked earlier whether you had made a good purchase, Ambassador, I said. I promise you, by the end of this week, you are going to wish you had never raised your hand. I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked back toward the gallery stairs, my 90 seconds long since expired. The chamber behind me, a chaos of raised voices and flickering translator devices, and as I climbed the steps, I allowed myself one long breath, because everything that came next depended on timing, and timing depended on nerve. My name is Ilara Marsh, and I am not a diplomat by training. I am an engineer. I spent the first 30 years of my life studying systems that nobody else in the galaxy understood, because nobody else in the galaxy had ever bothered to ask who maintained the roads they walked on every single day. I found the answer 11 years ago, in a maintenance archive buried so deep in the relay network's core systems that even the architects themselves, whoever or whatever they had once been, seemed to have forgotten it existed. I found my own species. The Council's vote would not become fully binding for 72 hours, a mandatory waiting period built into their charter to allow for what they called procedural review, though in 300 years no vote had ever actually been reviewed or reversed. It was a formality, a box to check, a rule nobody expected to matter. But 72 hours was exactly enough time for what I had planned, and I had spent 6 months making sure of it. I found Grace Whitfield waiting for me outside the chamber doors, her arms crossed, her expression somewhere between worried and impressed. That went about as well as we could have hoped, she said, falling into step beside me as I walked. Which is to say, terribly, and also perfectly. Grace was the closest thing I had to a partner in this, though partner was a generous word for someone who had spent the last 6 months telling me I was going to get us both killed, or worse, get humanity permanently branded as an unstable species not fit for galactic citizenship. She was a linguist by training, fluent in more alien dialects than any other human alive, and she had access to communication channels that even I did not fully understand. "Did you get the confirmation?" I asked. Grace pulled a small device from her jacket and handed it to me without breaking stride. "It arrived an hour ago," she said. "Encrypted through 6 different relay nodes, just like you asked. The ship is real, Ilara. It is inbound, and it is going to arrive exactly when you said it would." I looked down at the device in my hand, at the single line of text glowing on its screen, a message that had traveled further and through more secrecy than any diplomatic cable in galactic history. "Confirmed," the message read. "Vessel designation Meridian, Administrator Class, en route. Estimated arrival, 71 hours. Bring them to their knees, Ilara." It was signed with a name that meant nothing to anyone in that chamber, and everything to me, Daniel Cole. My mentor, the man who had trained me for this moment for the last decade, the man who had spent his entire life keeping a secret so large that even knowing it felt like carrying a weight no single person should have to bear alone. 71 hours, I said, mostly to myself. That gives us a little room to breathe." Grace gave me a look that suggested she did not feel like breathing was an option anymore. "A little room," she repeated. "Elara, you just told the entire Galactic Council that humanity built the relay network. Do you understand what happens if you cannot back that up? They will not just reject the claim, they will make an example of us. They will use it as proof that humans are dangerous, unstable, prone to grandiose delusions. They will finalize the sale in an afternoon just to make the embarrassment go away." "I know," I said. "And if you can back it up," she continued, her voice dropping lower, "do you understand what that means too? Every species on that council has spent 300 years building an entire civilization on top of infrastructure they believed belonged to no one. The moment they learn it belongs to us, they are not going to thank us for keeping it running. They are going to panic. Panicked people do dangerous things, Elara, and panicked governments do worse." I stopped walking, and Grace stopped beside me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything as the chamber doors closed behind the last of the departing delegates, their voices, still raised in argument, their fear already beginning to spread through the building, like smoke through a house that did not yet know it was on fire. "That is exactly why we are not going to give them a reason to panic," I said finally. "We are not walking in there with weapons, Grace. We are walking in there with proof, and proof does not need to shout, it only needs to be true." Grace studied my face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there seemed to settle something in her, because the tension in her shoulders eased just slightly, and she nodded. "Okay," she said. 71 hours. What do you need me to do?" "I need you to get a message to every human delegate still stationed across council space," I said, quietly. "No panic, no announcements, just a simple instruction. Whatever happens over the next 3 days, stay calm, stay visible, and do not apologize for anything." "And what are you going to do?" she asked. "I am going to go make sure the proof I promised actually exists where they can see it," I said. "And then I am going to wait for a ship that has been waiting 300 years to finally come home." We walked out of the council building together, into the strange twilight of a space station that never truly saw daylight, artificial light cycles mimicking a sunset that existed nowhere within 100 light years, and above us, through the great transparent dome that crowned the station, I could see the stars scattered across the black, in patterns that no human astronomer back on Earth had ever named, constellations that belonged to other worlds, other species, other histories. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of a jump point that would take even the fastest Kalith cruiser nearly 3 days to reach, a single human ship was already cutting through the dark toward us, carrying inside its hull a secret that had waited 3 centuries to be spoken aloud. I did not know exactly what that ship looked like. I did not know exactly what it carried, or who commanded it, beyond the name Daniel Cole had signed to his message. What I knew was that it was coming, and that when it arrived, nothing about how the galaxy understood humanity would ever be the same again. I thought about Ambassador Dosan's face when I had asked my question, the flicker of doubt beneath his silver skin, the first crack in 300 years of certainty. I thought about the Voth Elder striking the gavel, demanding proof as though proof were a burden I could not possibly carry, as though I had walked into that chamber with nothing but a wild accusation and a hope that no one would ask me to back it up. I had spent 11 years gathering that proof. I was not afraid of being asked to show it. What I was afraid of, if I was honest with myself, was what would happen after. Grace was right that panic was dangerous. 300 delegates who had just been told that the species they viewed as primitive and disposable actually held the keys to the entire galactic infrastructure. That was not information that would simply be absorbed calmly over dinner. Empires had fallen over smaller revelations. Wars had been fought over less. But I also knew something Grace did not fully understand yet, something Daniel had spent a decade teaching me before he ever let me near the deepest layers of the Relay Archive. Humanity had not built the network to rule the galaxy. We had built it to survive, 300 years ago, in the aftermath of a war so total that it had nearly erased us from existence entirely. We had walked away from our own creation and let the galaxy grow up around it, let other species believe they had built something themselves, or that some vanished precursor race had left it as a gift, because the alternative, standing in the light with a target already painted across our backs, would have finished what the war had started. Now, 71 hours from a ship that carried our name back into the light, I had to decide whether hiding had finally outlived its purpose, or whether I was about to make the same mistake that had almost destroyed us the first time. I looked at Grace, who was already typing out the first of her quiet messages to scattered human delegates across 100 worlds, her fingers moving with the steady confidence of someone who trusted me, even when she was terrified of what trusting me might cost. 3 days, I thought. 3 days to prove the truth, to hold the line, and to make sure that when the Meridian finally dropped out of its jump corridor at the edge of Council space, the galaxy was ready to listen instead of ready to fight. I did not know yet which one it would be, but I knew I was not going to let them auction off my species without a fight, and if the fight came in the form of proof instead of weapons, that was a fight I intended to win. The station's artificial evening deepened around us, the false stars brightening overhead, and somewhere in the dark beyond the dome, a single human vessel carried its cargo of truth ever closer, counting down the hours until everything changed. I did not sleep that night, though I told Grace I would try. Instead, I sat in the small quarters the council had assigned to the human delegation, a room barely large enough for a bed and a desk, tucked into the lowest and least desirable ring of the station, and I pulled up every piece of evidence I had gathered over 11 years of quiet, careful work. Maintenance logs, architecture diagrams, written in a coding language that predated every alphabet currently in use across Council space, diagnostic signatures buried so deep in the relay network's core that even the engineers who serviced the stations every day had no idea they were looking at human handwriting. I had one chance to present this to the Council, and I intended to make it count. The knock on my door came just after what the station called midnight, though midnight meant nothing here beyond a number on a clock. I opened it to find Oliver Bennett standing in the corridor, still wearing his formal council attire, his tie loosened, his eyes red from lack of sleep of his own. Oliver was the senior human delegate, technically my superior, though in practice our roles had always blurred into something closer to partnership. He had been on the council for 9 years, longer than any other human, and he had watched 3 previous attempts to raise humanity's status fail quietly, buried under procedural objections and polite dismissals before they ever reached a vote. "You have officially lost your mind," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Do you know that? I have spent the last 2 hours fielding messages from 4 different delegations asking whether the human representative has suffered some kind of breakdown." "Did you tell them I hadn't?" I asked. "I told them I would get back to them," he said, dropping into the single chair beside my desk. "Elara, I need you to explain to me exactly what you are planning, and I need you to do it now, because if this goes wrong, it is not just your career that ends. It is every human delegate on this station, and possibly every human colony under council jurisdiction. They will use this as justification to tighten every restriction we have spent 9 years trying to loosen." "I understand the risk," I said. "Do you?" he said. "Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you decided to gamble the future of an entire species on a hunch." "It is not a hunch," I said, and I turned my desk screen toward him, pulling up the first of the maintenance archives I had found. "This is a diagnostic log from Relay Station 7, the one that anchors the jump corridor between Kalith space and the Denrathi cluster. It goes back 12,000 years. Watch the timestamp formatting." Oliver leaned forward, squinting at the screen, and I watched his expression shift from skepticism to something more careful as he studied the data. "That is a Gregorian calendar reference," he said slowly, "embedded in the timestamp metadata. That is an Earth dating system. It is not just a dating system," I said. "Look at the technician designation codes. Every maintenance entry for the last 12,000 years has been signed with an alphanumeric code that matches the internal personnel registry format used by the pre-war Earth Orbital Engineering Corps. I cross-referenced it against historical records we still have access to. The codes match actual named engineers, Oliver. People, not some vanished precursor species. People with families, people who had lives, people whose descendants are probably walking around Earth right now with no idea their ancestors built the backbone of galactic civilization." Oliver sat back slowly, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "How did you find this?" he finally asked. "I did not find it alone," I said. "I have been working with someone for over a decade. His name is Daniel Cole. He used to serve as a systems archivist before the Council restructured the human delegation, and he found the first fragments of this archive almost 20 years ago. He spent most of that time convinced it was too dangerous to reveal, that the galaxy was not ready, that humanity was not ready. He changed his mind 6 months ago, when he heard about the reclassification vote. And where is he now? Oliver asked. He is on a ship, I said. It is called the Meridian, and it will arrive in Council space in a little under 70 hours. It carries a full copy of the original Relay Network Architecture Archive, along with something else, something Daniel would not describe to me in detail over an unsecured channel, only that it would end any argument about who built this network, permanently and beyond any possible doubt. Oliver rubbed a hand across his face, the exhaustion in his features deepening into something closer to genuine fear. "You understand that if this is true," he said, "we are not just talking about winning an argument. We are talking about upending every assumption this council has built its authority on. The architects are treated as something close to sacred in half the founding myths of species across this galaxy. Learning that they are not gone, that they are us, ordinary and mortal, and sitting in the cheap seats of their own council chamber, that is not going to be received as good news by everyone." "I know," I said. "Some of them are going to be afraid," Oliver continued, "and some of them are going to be angry that they have spent 300 years looking down on the very species that kept their civilization running. Anger and fear together, Ilara, that is a combination that gets people hurt. I am counting on the fact that most beings, when shown undeniable proof, choose to adapt rather than to fight," I said. "But I am not naive, Oliver. That is exactly why I need you. I need the human delegation standing united, calm, and visible over the next 3 days, so that when the truth comes out, it does not come out as a threat. It comes out as a correction, a long overdue correction to a mistake 300 years old." Oliver was quiet for a long moment, staring at the timestamp data still glowing on my screen, at names that belonged to people who had lived and died, with no idea their work would one day be the thread holding an entire galaxy together. "If I help you with this," he said finally, "and it goes wrong, they will not just end my career, they may end the entire human delegation. They may cut off Earth's access to the Council entirely, and leave us stranded outside galactic trade for a generation." "If we do nothing," I said, "they finalize the sale in 72 hours regardless. There is no version of this where staying quiet keeps us safe, Oliver. The only choice we actually have is whether we go into the next 3 days on our knees or standing up." He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his tired eyes hardened into resolve. "All right," he said. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to call an emergency session of the human delegation," I said. "Every human currently stationed anywhere within 3 jump points of this station. I need you to brief them, carefully, on what is coming, without giving away the details that would let this leak before the Meridian arrives. And I need you to reach out to any council members you trust, quietly, and let them know that something significant is about to happen, so that when it does, they are not blindsided into a panic response." "Do we have anyone on the council we can actually trust?" he asked. "There is one," I said. "Her name is Nadia Reyes. She heads the Denrathi Liaison Office, and she has spent years arguing that the council's treatment of Tier 3 species is not just unjust, but strategically short-sighted. If anyone on that council is capable of hearing this news and choosing curiosity over fear, it is her." Oliver nodded slowly, and then he stood, straightening his loosened tie, as though preparing himself for a battle that had already begun the moment I asked my question in the chamber. "I will make the calls," he said. "But Ilara, I want you to understand something. This ship of yours, this Meridian, it needs to arrive exactly the way you have described, carrying exactly what you have promised, because if it does not, there will be no second chance. Not for you, not for me, and not for anyone wearing a human face on this station. It will arrive," I said, with more confidence than I entirely felt. "Daniel has spent 20 years preparing for this moment. He is not going to let it fail now." Oliver left, and I sat alone in my small quarters for a long time afterward, staring at the maintenance logs still glowing on my screen, at the names of engineers who had built something so vast and so enduring that an entire galaxy had mistaken it for the work of gods. I thought about how strange it was that the greatest secret in galactic history had been sitting in plain sight for 3 centuries, hidden not by walls or encryption but by simple, quiet, deliberate silence, generation after generation of humans, choosing to let the world believe we were less than we were, because the alternative, once upon a time, had nearly gotten us destroyed. I thought about the war that Daniel had told me about in fragments over the years, the war that had emptied half of Earth's population before the survivors finally found a way to end it, the war that had taught humanity the hardest lesson a species could learn, that being powerful and being safe were not the same thing at all. We had built the relay network in the ashes of that war, not as a monument to our strength, but as a way to disappear, to scatter ourselves quietly across a galaxy too vast and too indifferent to notice one more small, struggling species finding its feet in the dark. For 300 years, that strategy had worked. We had rebuilt in silence, grown in silence, learned the customs and languages and politics of 1,000 other worlds, while carefully, deliberately, never once revealing what we truly were. And now, because of one vote, because of one council's casual decision to treat us as property instead of people, that silence was about to end. I did not know if Daniel's plan was the right one. I did not know if the galaxy was ready to learn the truth, or if Oliver's fears about anger and fear turning into violence would prove correct. But I knew that the alternative, watching my species get sold like cargo while the truth sat buried and useless in an archive nobody else could read, was not a future I was willing to accept. Somewhere beyond the edge of the station, cutting through the dark at speeds no Calith engine could match, the Meridian carried its cargo of proof ever closer, and every hour that passed brought us nearer to a reckoning that had been 300 years in the making. I finally allowed myself to close my eyes as the artificial dawn began to brighten outside my window, not to sleep, but simply to rest, because tomorrow the real work would begin, and I intended to be ready for every version of what the galaxy might throw at us, in response to the truth I was about to hand them. Nadia Reyes met us in a small side chamber off the main council hall, a room normally reserved for private negotiations between delegations that did not wish to be overheard, and the moment the door closed behind us, she turned to face me with an expression that was equal parts fascination and disbelief. "You cannot possibly expect me to help you make an accusation like this without seeing something concrete first," she said. "Ilara, I like you. I have respected your work on this council since you arrived. But what you said in that chamber yesterday was not a diplomatic statement. It was a bomb, and bombs need to be handled very, very carefully. I did not come here to make an accusation," I said. "I came here to show you the truth, and then let you decide for yourself what to do with it." Grace set up a portable projector on the small table between us, and I pulled the same maintenance archive I had shown Oliver, along with several additional layers of evidence Daniel had transmitted to me overnight through the secure relay he had established. Architectural blueprints for the earliest relay stations, written in a language that, once decoded, resolved into an early technical dialect of English, mixed with mathematical notation still used in some human engineering schools today. Personnel records cross-referenced against genealogical databases still maintained on Earth, connecting ancient maintenance codes to real family names that existed in the present day. And finally, a set of construction timestamps that placed the very first relay station's completion date squarely within a window that corresponded to Earth's own historical records of a period my ancestors called the Long Silence, 3 centuries during which Earth had, by its own accounts, made no contact whatsoever with the wider galaxy. Nadia studied the data in silence for nearly 20 minutes, her sharp Denrathi eyes tracking across the screen with the focused intensity of someone whose entire career had been built on catching lies before they could take root, and when she finally looked up at me, her expression had changed entirely. "This is either the most elaborate fabrication I have ever seen," she said quietly, or it is the single most significant discovery in the recorded history of this council. It is not a fabrication, I said. I did not say I believed it was, she replied. I said it was one of two possibilities, and I have spent enough years in this chamber to know that the difference between those two possibilities is going to determine whether you are remembered as the delegate who told the galaxy an uncomfortable truth, or the delegate who nearly started a war with a lie. There is a third option, Grace said quietly, speaking for the first time since we had entered the chamber. She is telling the truth, and the ship arriving in 3 days is going to prove it beyond any argument, and the only question that actually matters right now is whether this council reacts to that truth with panic or with reason. Nadia looked at Grace for a long moment, and something in the younger woman's steady, unflinching gaze seemed to settle whatever doubt remained in the Denrathi ambassador's mind. All right, Nadia said finally. Let us assume, for the moment, that everything you have shown me is real. What do you actually want from me, Elara? I do not have the authority to overturn a council vote on my own. I do not need you to overturn anything, I said. I need you to help me buy time, and I need you to help me make sure that when the truth arrives, it arrives into a room that is prepared to hear it rationally, instead of a room already primed for panic. You have more credibility on this council than any other single delegate. If you are the one who first stands beside the evidence, other delegations will be far less likely to dismiss it out of hand or react with hostility. You are asking me to put my entire diplomatic career behind an unverified claim, she said. I am asking you to put your career behind the truth, I said. And I promise you, Ambassador Reyes, in 3 days you will have every piece of verification you could possibly ask for. Nadia was quiet for a long time, staring down at the data still glowing on the small table between us, at names and timestamps and architectural signatures that told a story 300 years old, a story that had been hiding in plain sight beneath every ship, every colony, every treaty this galaxy had ever negotiated. There is something else you should know, I said, before she could answer, something that goes beyond who built the network. If this council finalizes the sale of humanity while carrying the belief that we are a primitive, unaligned species with no meaningful standing, and then the truth comes out afterward, that the species you sold like cargo was the same species that has quietly kept your entire civilization functioning for 3 centuries, the diplomatic fallout will not just embarrass this council. It will destroy whatever trust remains between the founding species of the galactic community and everyone who depends on the infrastructure we built. You do not want to be remembered as the ambassador who let that happen when you had the chance to stop it. Nadia let out a long breath, something between a sigh and a low, disbelieving laugh, and then she nodded, slowly, as though coming to a decision she had already half made before I finished speaking. I will need to see this ship for myself, she said. I will not stand in front of the council and vouch for a claim I have not personally verified with my own eyes. But I will delay. I have enough standing to request a procedural review of the reclassification vote, citing irregularities in the evidentiary record, and I can stretch that review to consume most of the 72-hour window if necessary. That will buy you time, it will not buy you certainty. That is all I am asking for, I said. There is one more thing, Nadia said, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly as she studied my face. If this is true, Elara, if humanity truly built the foundation of everything this galaxy depends on, I need to understand why you waited 300 years to say anything. Because if my species had built something like this, we would not have hidden it, we would have used it. I thought carefully about how to answer her, because the question deserved more than a quick, easy response. We did not hide it out of arrogance, and we did not hide it as some kind of long game to gain leverage over anyone, I said. We hid it because the war that nearly destroyed us taught us something the rest of this galaxy has not yet had to learn firsthand. Power invites attention, and attention, when you are still recovering from near extinction, is the most dangerous thing in the universe. We built the network to survive, Nadia, not to rule. We walked away from it and let the galaxy believe whatever story made the most sense, because the truth, at the time, would have painted an enormous target on a species that had barely survived its own worst mistake. And now, she said quietly, why speak now, after 300 years of silence? Because silence only works as protection until someone tries to sell you, I said. We can keep hiding and let this council decide our fate without our voice in the room, or we can finally stand up and remind the galaxy that the species it has spent 3 centuries underestimating was never actually as small as everyone assumed. Nadia held my gaze for a long moment, and then, slowly, she extended a hand in the traditional Denrathi gesture of alliance, 4 fingers pressed together, palm turned upward. I hope, for all our sakes, that this ship of yours arrives exactly as you have described, she said, because if it does not, Elara Marsh, I do not think either of us will survive what comes next. It will arrive, I said, and I meant it with everything I had, even as a small, cold thread of doubt curled somewhere beneath my certainty, because I had staked everything on a message from a man I trusted more than almost anyone alive, and trust, however deep, was not the same thing as proof. We spent the rest of that day working in careful, coordinated silence, Nadia filing the procedural review that would stretch the council's timeline just far enough, Oliver briefing human delegates across a dozen stations on what was coming, without revealing enough detail to risk a leak, and Grace maintaining a steady, quiet stream of encrypted communication, with contacts scattered across council space, laying the groundwork for a truth that was about to reshape everything. I spent that day doing something different. I went back through every piece of evidence Daniel had ever sent me, every archive, every diagnostic log, every architectural blueprint, searching for anything I might have missed, any weakness an opposing delegation might exploit, any gap in the story that could be twisted into doubt. I found none. The evidence was airtight, layered, cross-referenced across a dozen independent systems that would have required an impossible, decades-long conspiracy to fabricate. But evidence, no matter how solid, was still just data on a screen. What the Council needed, what the entire galaxy needed, was something they could not argue with, could not dismiss as clever engineering or elaborate forgery. They needed to look truth in the eye and know, beyond any shadow of doubt, that it was real. That was exactly what the Meridian was bringing. By the time the artificial evening dimmed across the station again, word had already begun to spread in careful, controlled whispers through the diplomatic corridors, not the full truth, not yet, but enough to plant seeds of uncertainty in delegations that had, until now, never once questioned the foundations of their own civilization. I could feel the tension building in every conversation, every sideways glance from Calith attaches and Voth secretaries, every hurried, hushed meeting behind closed doors. The Galactic Council had built 300 years of certainty on a story it had never bothered to verify, and that certainty was about to crack wide open. Somewhere beyond the edge of known space, the Meridian continued its long, silent approach, carrying inside its hull the final proof that would end the argument forever, and I found myself standing at my window that night, watching the false stars overhead, counting down the hours until everything I had worked 11 years to build would either succeed beyond anything I had imagined, or collapse into the single greatest failure of my life. The rumors reached the Calith delegation faster than I expected, and by the second morning, Ambassador Threl Dosan requested an emergency meeting with the human delegation, a request that arrived through official channels, with a formality that felt almost desperate. Oliver wanted to decline. Grace wanted to accept immediately, arguing that refusing to meet would look like we had something to hide, which was precisely the opposite of the impression I needed to create. In the end, I made the decision myself, because it was my accusation that had started this, and it would be my responsibility to see it through. We met in a neutral chamber near the center of the station, a round room with no windows, designed specifically for negotiations where neither party wished to reveal anything about their true position through body language or environment. Threl Dosan arrived with 2 aides, both silent, both watching me with the same unblinking intensity as their ambassador. "Delegate Marsh," he began, his translator flattening the words into something carefully neutral, though I could hear the tension beneath it even through the mechanical filter. "I have spent the last day reviewing every historical record my delegation possesses regarding the architects. I have found nothing that confirms your claim, and nothing that disproves it either. This uncertainty is not acceptable to the Combine." "I understand," I said. I am not asking you to accept anything on faith, Ambassador. I am asking you to wait 70 hours for proof that cannot be argued with. The Combine has already invested significant resources into this trade agreement, he said. Preparations for asset transfer are underway. Delaying this process creates substantial financial exposure for my government. I nearly laughed, though I kept my expression carefully neutral. Asset transfer. He was talking about my species as though we were cargo containers being rerouted between shipping lanes, and the casual cruelty of that language, spoken without any apparent awareness of how it sounded, told me everything I needed to know about how little thought the Calith Combine had actually given to the 7 billion people they had just agreed to purchase. Ambassador, I said, keeping my voice level, if the claim I made in that chamber is false, then in 70 hours you will have lost nothing but a small delay, and you can proceed with your asset transfer exactly as planned. But if the claim is true, and you proceed anyway, ignoring evidence that the species you are attempting to purchase is the same species responsible for the infrastructure your entire economy depends on, I promise you that the diplomatic and economic consequences will make a 70-hour delay look like nothing at all. Threl Dosan's silver skin caught the chamber lights as he shifted slightly in his seat, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something that looked almost like genuine uncertainty cross his features. You speak with a great deal of confidence for someone whose entire species has no formal standing on this council, he said. Confidence is not the same thing as arrogance, Ambassador, I said. I am confident because I have spent 11 years gathering proof that cannot be faked, cannot be argued away, and cannot be dismissed as coincidence. I am not asking the Combine to simply trust me. I am asking you to wait long enough to see the evidence for yourself, and then make whatever decision you believe is right. One of his aides leaned close and murmured something in a dialect my translator could not fully parse, and Threl Dozan's expression shifted again, something calculating settling behind his unblinking eyes. There is a rumor circulating among several delegations, he said slowly, that a human vessel is inbound toward council space, a vessel that identifies itself using administrative override codes tied to the original relay network architecture. Is this rumor accurate, Delegate Marsh? I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my face perfectly still. The information had leaked faster than I anticipated, which meant someone, somewhere, had been monitoring long-range sensor arrays closely enough to catch the Meridian's transponder signature already, even at this distance. That was either very good news, because it meant the ship was real and detectable and undeniable, or very dangerous news, because it meant other delegations now had nearly 2 full days to prepare a response before the ship actually arrived. I will not confirm or deny rumors, Ambassador, I said. What I will tell you is that in less than 70 hours, every delegation on this station will have all the answers they need, delivered in a form that leaves no room for doubt. I would encourage the Combine to use that time wisely, rather than rushing to finalize a transaction you may come to regret. Threl Dosan studied me for a long, silent moment, and then he rose from his seat, his aides rising with him in practiced unison. I will relay your position to my government, he said. I would advise you, Delegate Marsh, to hope that whatever this ship is carrying meets the extraordinary weight of the claim you have made, because if it does not, the consequences will not fall only on you. They will fall on every human this council has jurisdiction over, and I do not believe the Combine will be inclined toward mercy. He left without another word, his aides trailing behind him, and the moment the chamber door closed, Grace let out a breath she had clearly been holding for the entire meeting. That went about as well as it could have, she said, echoing her own words from 2 days earlier, though this time there was considerably less confidence in her voice. They know about the ship, I said. That changes things. It changes the timeline, Oliver said, standing near the far wall where he had watched the entire exchange in silence. If other delegations know the Meridian is coming, some of them are going to want to intercept it before it reaches council space, verify its cargo, or worse, prevent it from arriving at all. The thought settled into my stomach like a stone. I had planned for the council's reaction to the truth once it arrived. I had not fully planned for the possibility that someone might try to stop the truth from arriving in the first place. I need to reach Daniel, I said, already moving toward the door. He needs to know the element of surprise is gone. I found a secure comm terminal in the human delegation's small suite of offices, and I spent nearly 20 minutes working through the layered encryption protocols Daniel and I had established, routing the signal through enough relay nodes that even a determined intercept would struggle to trace its origin. When his response finally came through, it was calmer than I expected, almost amused. "I know they are watching," his message read. "We detected 3 separate long-range scans over the last 6 hours, 2 Calith, 1 unidentified. It does not change anything, Elara. The Meridian was not built to hide. It was built to arrive exactly as promised, regardless of who is watching, or who might wish to stop it. Trust the plan. 70 hours. We will not be late, and we will not be stopped." I read his words 3 times, searching for any hint of doubt beneath the confidence, and found none. Daniel Cole had spent 2 decades preparing for this exact moment, and if he was not worried about interception, I told myself, then perhaps I did not need to be either. But that night, as I lay awake in my small quarters listening to the quiet hum of the station's systems around me, I could not fully shake the cold thread of fear that had settled into my chest the moment Threl Dosan confirmed that other delegations already knew what was coming. Grace was right. Panic made people dangerous, and a galaxy full of delegations who had just learned that an unarmed human vessel was approaching, carrying proof that would upend 300 years of assumed history. That was not a situation where I could guarantee everyone would choose patience over fear. I thought about the war Daniel had told me about, the war that had taught humanity to hide rather than to shine, and I wondered, not for the first time, whether I had made the right choice in deciding that the time for hiding was over. There was no way to know for certain, not yet. All I could do was trust the plan, trust Daniel, and trust that when the Meridian finally arrived, it would carry not just proof, but enough quiet, undeniable strength to make even the most frightened delegation choose reason over conflict. The hours continued to tick down, each one bringing us closer to a moment that could either save my species or doom it, and somewhere out in the vast indifferent dark between the stars, a single human ship continued its steady, unstoppable approach toward a galaxy that had no idea what it was truly about to face. The final hours passed slower than any of the days before them, each minute stretched thin by a tension that had settled over the entire station like a fog that would not lift. By the time the countdown Daniel had given me reached its final stretch, word of the approaching human vessel had spread far beyond the delegations that had first detected its long-range signature. Every council member, from the smallest trade representative to the highest-ranking ambassadors, seemed to know that something unprecedented was about to happen, even if most of them still did not understand exactly what. The station's public concourses, usually filled with the easy, unhurried movement of beings going about routine diplomatic business, had taken on a nervous energy. Clusters of delegates gathered in corners speaking in low, urgent voices, sensor technicians running unscheduled diagnostic sweeps of the surrounding space, security personnel from a dozen different species patrolling with a visible alertness that had not been there 3 days earlier. Nadia's procedural review had done exactly what she promised, stretching the mandatory waiting period on the reclassification vote to its absolute legal limit, and the council had reluctantly agreed to reconvene for a formal session at the precise moment the Meridian was projected to arrive. Whether that timing was coincidence or design, I could not say, but it meant that when the truth finally revealed itself, it would do so in front of the very body that had voted to sell my species into servitude. I stood in the observation gallery once more, this time with Oliver on one side and Grace on the other, watching the massive viewport that dominated the far wall of the chamber, a transparent window onto the black expanse of space beyond the station's docking perimeter. Every delegate in the room had their attention fixed on that same viewport, waiting, watching, the low murmur of 300 conversations gradually fading into an anticipatory silence as the countdown reached its final minutes. Threl Dosan sat near the front of the chamber, his silver skin unusually pale, his posture rigid in a way that suggested he had spent the last several hours preparing himself for every possible outcome and finding comfort in none of them. The Voth elder who had presided over the original vote occupied the central dais, crystal body catching and scattering the chamber lights in nervous, flickering patterns that betrayed an unease no amount of formal composure could fully hide. And then, exactly on schedule, exactly as Daniel had promised, space itself seemed to fold and unfold in a single fluid motion just beyond the station's perimeter, and a vessel emerged from the tier in reality that FTL travel always left behind, sliding smoothly into normal space as though it had simply stepped through an open door. The meridian was not what I expected. I do not know exactly what image I had built in my mind over the preceding days, some combination of imagined military strength and desperate hope, but the ship that now hung silently against the black beyond the viewport was neither imposing nor aggressive in any way that Kalith warships or Denrathi cruisers would have recognized. It was elegant. Long, smooth lines curving gracefully along a hull that seemed to shift color subtly as it caught the light, not through any obvious weapon systems or armor plating, but through an architecture that looked, more than anything else, like something grown rather than built. Organic curves blended seamlessly with precise geometric structure in a way that spoke of an engineering philosophy far beyond anything currently understood by any species in that chamber. It carried no visible weapons. It made no aggressive maneuvers. It simply hung there, silent and patient, exactly where it was meant to be. A voice came through the chamber's communication system a moment later, translated instantly into every language represented in the room, though something about the cadence of the original words beneath the translation felt unmistakably, achingly familiar. "This is the vessel Meridian, requesting formal audience with the Galactic Council," the voice said. "My name is Daniel Cole. I carry with me the complete architectural record of the relay network that spans this galaxy, along with full verification of its origin and construction. I ask for exactly the same courtesy this council extended to Delegate Elara Marsh 3 days ago. 90 seconds. I promise you, it is worth far more than that." The chamber remained utterly silent, 300 delegates staring at the elegant vessel hanging beyond the viewport, and I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in days, a tension I had not fully realized I was carrying until this exact moment, when the plan I had staked everything on finally, undeniably, became real in front of the entire council. The Voth elder rose slowly from the central dais, its crystal voice carrying clearly through the chamber's amplification system. "The council grants audience," the elder said. "Approach and be heard." A smaller shuttle detached from the Meridian's underside a moment later, gliding smoothly toward the station's primary docking bay, and I found myself moving before I had consciously decided to, slipping out of the observation gallery and down through the station's corridors toward the bay, Grace and Oliver close behind me, my heart pounding with an anticipation I had not allowed myself to fully feel until this exact moment. I reached the docking bay just as the shuttle's outer hatch began to cycle open, a hiss of equalizing pressure filling the cavernous space, and I stood there, waiting, watching the hatch slide fully open to reveal the figure standing within. Daniel Cole looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, deep lines etched around eyes that still held the same quiet, steady intensity I remembered from the first day he had shown me the fragments of the archive that had changed the entire course of my life. He wore no formal uniform, no elaborate diplomatic attire, only a simple gray traveling coat that seemed almost deliberately understated against the weight of what he was about to reveal. He stepped down from the shuttle, and for a moment, neither of us said anything at all. 300 years of careful, deliberate silence, finally reaching its end in the quiet space between us. "You did it," I said finally. "You actually did it." "We did it," he corrected, a small, tired smile crossing his weathered face. "You started this, Ilara. I only finished what you began." Behind him, several more figures emerged from the shuttle, men and women I did not recognize, each carrying themselves with the same quiet, unassuming confidence that Daniel projected, and I realized with a start that these were the crew of the Meridian, the people who had spent months, perhaps years, preparing for this single moment. "Is it really here?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, already understood from the calm certainty in his eyes that everything he had promised was about to become real in front of the entire Galactic Council, the full archive, the proof, everything, Daniel said. And something more than that, something I did not tell you about over our secure channel, because I needed you to trust the plan without needing that particular piece of information to carry you through these last 3 days. What is it? I asked. He glanced past me, toward Oliver and Grace standing just behind, and then back to me, his expression settling into something that mixed pride and grief in equal measure. We are not the last human ship built during the long silence, he said quietly. We are the first one to come home. There are others, Ilara, many others, scattered across this galaxy, quietly maintaining relay stations, monitoring trade routes, watching over the infrastructure our ancestors built, all of them waiting for exactly this moment, the moment when hiding finally stopped being the safer choice. The Meridian did not travel here alone in spirit. It travels here as the first voice of a network of humans who have been present in this galaxy far longer, and in far greater numbers, than anyone beyond a handful of us ever realized. I stood there in the vast, echoing docking bay, absorbing the weight of what he had just told me, and I understood, in that moment, that everything I thought I knew about the scale of this revelation had been only a fraction of the true picture. This was not simply about proving who had built a relay network 300 years ago. This was about an entire hidden network of humanity, quietly woven throughout galactic civilization for centuries, finally stepping out of the shadows all at once. We do not have much time before the Council expects your audience, Grace said gently, breaking the silence that had settled over the four of us. Daniel, are you ready? Daniel looked at me, and something in his steady gaze settled the last of the nervous energy still coiled in my chest. I have been ready for 20 years, he said. The only question now is whether the galaxy is ready to listen. We walked together back through the station's corridors, toward the chamber where 300 delegates waited in tense, uncertain silence, carrying between us the full weight of a secret 3 centuries in the making. And as the chamber doors rose before us, revealing the vast circular hall and every anxious, watching face within it, I felt, for the first time since this entire ordeal began, something that felt very much like hope. The chamber fell into absolute silence the moment Daniel Cole stepped onto the central floor, 300 delegates watching in a stillness so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the station's environmental systems beneath the quiet, a sound that was usually lost beneath the ordinary noise of council business. Daniel did not rush. He walked to the center of the floor with the unhurried calm of a man who had spent 2 decades preparing for this exact moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried through the chamber's amplification system with a steadiness that made the earlier fear and uncertainty in the room feel, for the first time, almost unnecessary. 3 days ago, Delegate Marsh asked this council a simple question, he began. Who built the relay network? I am here to answer that question fully, and to back that answer with evidence that I believe will satisfy even the most rigorous skeptic in this chamber. He raised a small device, no larger than the palm of his hand, and a holographic display bloomed to life above the chamber floor, vast and detailed, showing architectural schematics that stretched back further than any historical record the council possessed. Every delegate in the room leaned forward, drawn despite themselves by the sheer scale and precision of what floated before them. This is the original construction record for Relay Station 1, the very first node in the network that now connects every major population center in known space, Daniel said. It was completed 12,000 years ago, according to a dating system your archives have never been able to fully translate, because it was never meant for you to translate. It was written in a language called English, using a calendar system tied to a planet most of you have never had reason to visit, Earth. The holographic display shifted, cycling through dozens of additional records, each one more detailed than the last, personnel logs, engineering diagrams, diagnostic histories spanning millennia, all of it converging on the same undeniable conclusion that Daniel had traveled across the galaxy to prove. Threldosan rose from his seat, his silver skin practically glowing under the chamber lights, his voice carrying an edge of desperation beneath its careful diplomatic tone. Records can be fabricated, he said. Sophisticated forgery is not beyond the capability of a species desperate to avoid an unfavorable trade agreement. I anticipated this objection, Daniel said calmly, and he gestured toward the massive viewport at the edge of the chamber, where the meridian still hung silently in the black beyond the station. If fabricated records are not sufficient, allow me to offer something considerably harder to fake. He tapped the small device again, and the ship beyond the viewport responded, a section of its elegant hull sliding open to reveal an internal chamber bathed in soft light, and within that chamber, visible even from this distance through the station's enhanced viewport optics, stood a structure unlike anything any delegate in that room had ever seen. A relay core, identical in every fundamental respect to the massive stations that anchored jump corridors across the entire galaxy, except smaller, portable, and unmistakably, undeniably active. This is a fully functional relay core, built using the exact same technology and methodology as the network you have all depended on for 300 years, Daniel said. I invite any qualified engineer from any delegation in this chamber to board the Meridian and inspect it personally, down to its smallest component. I invite you to compare its construction techniques against the massive stations anchoring your jump corridors right now. You will find they are identical, because they were built by the same hands, using the same knowledge, passed down across 12,000 years of continuous human presence in this galaxy. A murmur swept through the chamber, delegates turning to each other, voices rising and falling in overlapping waves of disbelief and dawning realization, and the Voth Elder struck the ceremonial gavel against its resonance plate once more, though this time the sound felt less like an assertion of authority and more like a desperate attempt to hold on to some fragment of order in a room that was rapidly losing its grip on 300 years of certainty. I offer one final piece of evidence, Daniel continued, once the chamber had settled enough for his voice to carry clearly again. Every relay station in this network responds to a specific administrative override protocol, a safeguard built into the original architecture to allow for emergency maintenance and system-wide diagnostics. This protocol has never once been triggered in the recorded history of galactic civilization, because no species beyond humanity has ever possessed the authorization codes required to activate it. He tapped the device a third time, and the holographic display shifted once more, this time showing a real-time diagnostic readout, not from the Meridian, but from the relay station anchoring the very jump corridor that connected this council station to the rest of galactic space. I am transmitting a Level 1 administrative diagnostic pulse now, Daniel said. Every screen in this chamber connected to the station's information network will display the response. A ripple of light passed across every display surface in the massive chamber simultaneously, screens that had been showing council business logs and delegate identification records flickering instead into a cascading stream of system diagnostics. 12,000 years of maintenance history scrolling past in an unbroken chain, every entry stamped with the same unmistakable human designation codes Daniel's records had shown moments before, and beneath it all, a final line of text that appeared on every screen at once, glowing steady and undeniable. Administrator authorization confirmed. Origin species, human. Access level, founding architect. The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it in that chamber. It was not the silence of shock, or the silence of disbelief. It was the silence of an entire assembly of delegates simultaneously understanding, beyond any possible argument, that everything they had believed about the foundations of their civilization for 300 years had just been proven, irrevocably, wrong. Threldosan sank back into his seat, his silver skin pale, his earlier composure entirely gone, and across the chamber I watched similar reactions ripple through delegation after delegation, ambassadors staring at the screens before them, at the elegant ship still hanging silently beyond the viewport, at Daniel Cole, standing calm and unhurried in the center of the floor, having just dismantled 300 years of assumed history, with nothing more than truth, patiently gathered and carefully presented. The Voth Elder rose slowly from the central dais, its crystal body flickering with a rhythm that suggested genuine, unguarded uncertainty for the first time since I had known it. This council, the Elder said, its voice noticeably less steady than before, requires time to fully process the implications of what has just been presented. You may take whatever time you require, Daniel said, but I would ask this council to remember one thing as you deliberate. Humanity did not come here today to make demands, or to threaten this council with the power we hold over your infrastructure. We came here because a vote was passed 3 days ago to sell an entire species into a trade agreement without a single voice from that species being permitted to object. We came here to ensure that whatever decision this council makes going forward, it is made with full and complete information, rather than 300 years of convenient assumption. He turned then, and for the first time since he had entered the chamber, he looked directly at me, standing in the gallery beside Grace and Oliver, and something in his weathered, steady expression carried a warmth that cut through all the formal weight of the moment, a recognition of everything the two of us had built together to reach this exact point. "I yield the floor," Daniel said, back to Delegate Marsh, who I believe has a final word for this council. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the gallery, toward me, and I felt the full weight of 300 delegates watching, waiting, no longer with the dismissive boredom of 3 days ago, but with something closer to genuine, unguarded attention, the kind of attention a species only earns after proving, beyond any argument, that it deserves to be heard. I walked down from the gallery once more, my footsteps echoing across the same polished floor, where I had stood 3 days earlier armed with nothing but a question and a promise, and this time I felt no uncertainty at all, as I reached the center of the chamber, and turned to face the assembled council. 3 days ago, I asked you who built the relay network, I said. You have your answer now. I am not here to ask this council for an apology, though I believe one is owed. I am not here to threaten this council with the leverage humanity now clearly holds over every jump corridor, every trade route, every piece of infrastructure this galaxy depends on, though I want every delegate in this room to understand fully that such leverage exists, and always has. I paused, letting the weight of that statement settle fully across the silent chamber, before continuing. What I am here to ask is simple. Rescind the reclassification vote. Grant humanity full founding status on this council, with the same voice, the same vote, and the same standing as every other species that has called this galaxy home. Not because we have proven we hold power over your infrastructure, but because we have proven, beyond any possible doubt, that we have earned a seat at this table 300 years ago and simply chose, for our own survival, not to claim it until now. I looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegate after delegate, watching the fear and disbelief of moments earlier begin, slowly, to shift into something else entirely. The choice is yours, I said. But I would remind this council of something important. We built this network to connect a galaxy, not to control it. We are not here to become your rulers. We are here to finally, after 300 years, become your equals. I stepped back, and the chamber remained silent for a long, suspended moment. 300 delegates, absorbing the full weight of everything that had just been revealed, before the Voth Elder finally rose once more, its crystal voice carrying a note of something that had not been present 3 days earlier, something that sounded, unmistakably, like humility. This council will reconvene tomorrow to formally address the matter of humanity's standing, the Elder said. Until that time, all proceedings related to the reclassification vote are suspended, pending full review of the evidence presented today. The gavel came down once, a single clear note echoing through the vast chamber, and as the sound faded into silence, I felt Daniel's hand rest briefly on my shoulder, a quiet, steady gesture of pride and relief. And I understood, standing there at the center of a chamber that had gathered to sell my species 3 days earlier, that we had finally, after 300 years of careful silence, begun to write an entirely new chapter in humanity's long, quiet, extraordinary story. The council reconvened the following morning, and this time, when I walked into the chamber, no one treated the human delegation as an afterthought, seated somewhere in the shadow of the main proceedings. Chairs had been added near the center of the floor, a small but deliberate gesture that Nadia later told me had taken considerable argument to arrange overnight, a physical acknowledgement that humanity's place in this room had fundamentally changed in the span of a single day. Threl Dosan approached me before the session formally began, and I braced myself, expecting more resistance, more careful diplomatic maneuvering, designed to salvage whatever advantage the Caliph Combine could still extract from a situation that had spiraled entirely beyond their control. Instead, he simply stood before me for a long moment, his silver skin catching the morning light filtering through the chamber's high windows, and inclined his head in a gesture I recognized, from months of studying Calith customs, as a formal acknowledgement of miscalculation. "The Combine withdraws its position on the trade agreement," he said. "We recognize now that we entered negotiations without a complete understanding of who and what we were negotiating with. I offer this not as an admission of wrongdoing under Combine law, but as a statement of fact that I believe this council needs to hear plainly." "Thank you, Ambassador," I said, and I meant it, because an apology delivered honestly, even one carefully worded to avoid formal liability, was worth more in that moment than any amount of continued conflict would have been. The formal session began shortly after, and I watched as delegation after delegation rose to address the chamber, some offering cautious congratulations, others still visibly working through the shock of everything that had been revealed the previous day, and a few, inevitably, still searching for ways to frame the revelation as something less significant than it truly was. But beneath all of it, I could feel the fundamental shift that had taken place, the quiet, unmistakable understanding that humanity would never again be dismissed as a primitive, unaligned species with no meaningful voice in galactic affairs. The vote to formally rescind the reclassification and to grant humanity full founding status on the Council passed with an overwhelming majority, though not without a handful of abstentions from delegations still too shaken by the scale of the revelation to commit fully to a new understanding of their place in the galaxy. I did not resent those abstentions. 300 years of assumed history did not unravel overnight without leaving some lingering uncertainty in its wake, and I understood that trust, once broken, however unintentionally, took time to rebuild. After the session closed, Daniel found me in a quiet side corridor, away from the crowds of delegates still processing everything that had happened, and he handed me a small data crystal, unmarked, unassuming. "What is this?" I asked. "The full archive," he said. "Every record, every schematic, every piece of history I have spent 20 years gathering. I am giving it to you, Ilara, because I believe it belongs with the person who had the courage to finally ask the question that started all of this." I turned the small crystal over in my hand, feeling the weight of everything it represented, and I looked up at Daniel, at the tired, satisfied expression on his weathered face. "What happens now?" I asked. "To you, to the Meridian, to the others you mentioned, the ones still scattered across the galaxy. Now," he said, "we come home, all of us, slowly, carefully, without the panic that both of us feared might follow this revelation. Humanity has spent 3 centuries hiding in plain sight, Ilara. That chapter is finished. What comes next is something neither of us has ever had the chance to build before. A humanity that stands openly among the stars, not as a secret, not as a hidden foundation beneath someone else's civilization, but as an equal partner in whatever this galaxy becomes next." I thought about the war that had started all of this, the war that had taught my ancestors to disappear rather than risk destruction, and I thought about how strange and wonderful it felt to finally stand on the other side of that fear, no longer hiding, no longer diminished, but simply, finally, present. Grace found us a few minutes later, her expression carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent the last 3 days running on adrenaline and very little sleep, though beneath the exhaustion I could see something bright and hopeful in her eyes that had not been there when this entire ordeal began. "You should see what is happening in the main concourse," she said. "Delegations from a dozen different species are lining up outside the human delegation's offices. Everyone wants to talk to us now. Everyone wants to understand what this means for trade agreements, for diplomatic protocols, for everything that has to be renegotiated now that the entire foundation of galactic infrastructure ownership has changed." "That sounds exhausting," Oliver said dryly, arriving just behind her, though the small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth suggested he was looking forward to exactly that kind of exhausting work in a way he had not been able to for the past 9 years of quiet, dismissed diplomacy. I looked around at the 3 of them, Daniel with his 20 years of patient preparation, Grace with her tireless quiet coordination, Oliver with his steady, weathered experience navigating a council that had finally begun to listen, and I felt something settle in my chest that I had not fully expected to feel amid all the tension and uncertainty of the past 3 days. Something that felt unmistakably like the beginning of something entirely new. We walked together back toward the main concourse, toward a station full of delegates who, only 4 days earlier, had voted to sell my species like cargo, and who now waited, eager and uncertain in equal measure, to understand exactly what kind of galaxy they were going to be sharing with humanity going forward. Ambassador Dosan fell into step beside me as we walked, and after a moment of silence, he spoke again, his translator carrying a note of something almost like genuine curiosity beneath its usual careful neutrality. "I have one question, Delegate Marsh," he said. "If your species is willing to reveal itself now, after 3 centuries of careful hiding, what changed? What made this the moment you finally decided to step into the light?" I thought about his question carefully before answering, because it deserved more than a quick, easy response, and because I suspected it was a question I would be asked many more times in the days and months to come. "We did not choose this moment," I said. "This council chose it for us, the day it decided we were nothing more than an asset to be traded. We spent 300 years believing that safety meant staying small, staying quiet, staying hidden. But hiding only protects you until someone decides you are worth taking. The moment this council tried to sell us, we understood that the old strategy had finally run its course. We were never going to stay silent forever, Ambassador. We were simply waiting for a reason good enough to justify the risk of stepping forward. You gave us that reason." Threl Dosan considered this for a long moment, his silver skin catching the light of the concourse around us, crowded now with delegates from 100 worlds, all of them watching the small group of humans walking through their midst with an attention that had never once been afforded to us before. "Then I suppose," he said finally, "the Combine should be grateful, in a strange way, that our miscalculation gave your species the reason it needed." I allowed myself a small smile at that, the same smile I had offered him 3 days earlier in the council chamber, though this time it carried none of the sharp, defiant edge that had colored it then. This smile was simpler, quieter, the smile of someone who had spent 11 years fighting for a truth that had finally, fully arrived. "Perhaps it should," I said, "though I would advise the Combine and every other delegation on this council to remember this lesson going forward. Never assume you understand the true value of something simply because it has chosen, for its own reasons, not to reveal its full strength." We walked on together through the crowded concourse, humanity's quiet, patient centuries of hidden contribution, finally stepping fully into the light of a galaxy that was only now beginning to understand exactly what it had been standing on all along. And somewhere behind us, beyond the station's massive viewports, the Meridian continued to hang silently among the stars, the first of many human vessels that would soon begin arriving openly across council space, carrying with them not a threat, not a claim to power, but simply, finally, the truth of who we had always been. The Galactic Council had voted to sell humanity 4 days earlier, certain they understood exactly what they were purchasing. They had been wrong, and as I walked through that crowded concourse, surrounded by the people who had helped me prove it, I understood that this was not the end of humanity's story in this galaxy. It was only, at long last, the true beginning.